Donald J. Trump. Forthright, bold, and unapologetically brash. While many called him rude, for millions of Americans, Trump represented something they hadn't seen in Washington for years: a fighter, willing to stand up to global elites and powerful enemies who seek to diminish America's sovereignty. From the moment he stepped into the Oval Office, Trump made it clear he wasn't there to play the game of diplomatic niceties. He was there to disrupt the status quo, challenge America's enemies, and restore the country's strength. Critics said it couldn't be done. They mocked him for sitting down with Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea. But for the first time in decades, Trump brought a rogue nation to the negotiating table. The media was quick to label it a failure, an act of legitimizing a tyrant. But what they couldn't ignore was that Trump's approach was bold. He wasn't afraid to take risks to achieve peace.
Because President Trump has put us in a position where we can actually prevail and make the world a better, safer place.
Okay, Greg?
Well, if this were Obama, they would already have demolished Mount Rushmore, and they'd put 4 Obama heads right there. I want to hit the point about the optics. They say by elevating Kim, the optics are he's getting something for nothing. It may actually help Rocket Man, but why wouldn't he do it? The point is, that's going to be part of the deal.
Trump's boldness did not end with North Korea. He strengthened America's alliances, especially with Israel, where he stood by Prime Minister Netanyahu and recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, an unprecedented move that other leaders had promised for years but never delivered. At the United Nations, Trump didn't mince words. He declared that America would no longer bow to globalist institutions, nor would it be bound by ineffective treaties that jeopardized U.S. sovereignty. From withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal to reimposing sanctions, Trump's foreign policy sent a clear message to rogue nations. The United States would no longer be held hostage by bad actors. Iran's streets were filled with protesters, but in Washington, Trump was steadfast in his resolve.
This president has led bold initiatives in nearly every corner of the world. In China, he's pulled back the curtain on the predatory aggression of the Chinese Communist Party. The president has held China accountable for covering up the China virus and allowing it to spread death and economic destruction in America and around the world. And he will not rest until justice is done. He has ensured that the Chinese Communist Party spies posing as diplomats in America are jailed or sent back to China. And he has ended the ridiculously unfair trade arrangement with China that punched a hole in our economy. Those jobs are coming back home.
But Trump didn't just focus on diplomacy. He made it his mission to rebuild America's military after years of neglect. He knew that a strong military was the foundation of peace. To his supporters, Donald Trump wasn't just a leader, he was a fighter, unafraid to challenge the global elites, unafraid to call out America's enemies, and unafraid to put American sovereignty first.
We are one movement, one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. So with American pride swelling in our hearts and American courage stirring in our souls, I say these words to you tonight. We will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again. Thank you, Ohio. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Trump's leadership was not about being liked. It was about protecting the future of America. In the face of global challenges, he stood firm, a leader unapologetic in his defense of American sovereignty. But as we approach the 2024 election, the fight for America's future is far from over. For while Trump fought for America's strength, others in Washington had different plans. Kamala Harris is a radical left Marxist. She likes to call herself middle class, and she often forgets to talk about the 6 years that she lived in the most affluent neighborhood of Montreal, Canada, or years of living with some of America's top academics. Her father was the first black scholar to be granted tenure in the Stanford University Department of Economics, where he focused on Marxist theory. Her mother was a biologist at the University of California, Berkeley, until she moved the family to Canada for a position at McGill University's medical school. While in Montreal, Kamala lived in Montreal's most affluent neighborhood, traveling back to Palo Alto, California to spend summers with her Marxist father. Kamala began college in Montreal and then transferred to Howard University in Washington, D.C. Throughout her political career, supercharged at the start by her close personal relationship with Willie Brown, then one of the most powerful politicians in California, Harris has believed in and advanced far-left values. During her failed race for president in 2019, Harris owned her progressive stance, proudly and repeatedly describing her far-left positions in interviews, town halls, and during debates.
Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
Kamala Harris performed so poorly that she dropped out of the 2020 race even before the first primary. Still, having never received even one vote in any state presidential primary, Kamala Harris was chosen by Democrat Party insiders to become their 2024 candidate for president. And they claim they're trying to save our democracy? Today, Kamala Harris wants us to believe that without abandoning a single value that has governed her for 59 years, she suddenly changed many of her policy positions. She wants us to believe she is a centrist. Self-described socialist Senator Bernie Sanders described this false makeover for what it is.
You have described Vice President Kamala Harris as a progressive. She has previously supported Medicare for all. Now she does not. She's previously supported a ban on fracking. Now she does not. These, Senator, are ideas that you have campaigned on. Do you think that she is abandoning her progressive ideals?
No, I don't think she's abandoning her ideals. I think she's trying to be pragmatic and doing what she thinks is right in order to win the election.
One of the brightest commentators in conservative media, Kenan Spivak, weighed in on Kamala the Chameleon in his August 30th, 2024 column, published in The American Mind. He singled out her strategy of combining lies about her goals and beliefs with lies about Donald Trump's positions. As Spivak observes,
if Harris's positions were popular, she would talk about them. But because her positions appeal only to a small percentage of voters, she has to pretend to be someone she is not. And because Trump's positions appeal to most Americans, she has to trick voters into seeing him as extreme, even though he is not. Kamala Harris is firmly on the far left fringe of the Democrat Party. By remaining purposely vague on Israel's right of defense, largely silent about the outbreak of anti-Semitism in the United States and Hamas' October 7 attack on Israel, boycotting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress, and selecting far-left advisors for outreach to Jews and Muslims, Harris is demonstrating that she is prepared to abandon America's closest ally in the Middle East, Israel, and her fealty to the radical perspective that America, Israel, whites, and Jews are the world's leading oppressors, and so-called marginalized minorities are the oppressed.
Following a meeting with Netanyahu, Harris vowed not to be silent about Palestinian suffering and issued only conditional support for Israel's right of defense, saying Israel has a right to defend itself and how it does so matters. What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. And yet, when it comes to providing Israel with the munitions it needs to provide that defense, Kamala the Chameleon supported forcing Israel to the negotiating table by denying it the 2,000-pound bombs and other weapons it needs.
Well, Eugene, for example, one of the things that we have done that I am entirely supportive of is the pause that we've put on the 2,000-pound bombs. And so there is some leverage that we have had and used.
But beyond the issue of Israel, Spivak exposed a series of Harris' egregious agenda flip-flops designed to deceive voters in the 2024 presidential campaign. He particularly credited a devastating TV ad exposing Harris' radical positions, which was created by Pennsylvania GOP Senate candidate Dave McCormick, calling it a must-see. So we will.
Kamala Harris is inspiring and very capable.
You're considered the most liberal United States senator.
We're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
What is the solution for voters in the fossil fuel industry?
Giving the workers an ability to transition.
Abolish ICE.
And we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
It is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street.
People who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
For people out there who like their insurance, they don't get to keep it.
Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on. I am opposed to any policy that would deny any human being public health, period.
The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
I'm Dave McCormick, and I approve this message.
President Trump's campaign also shared its 2 cents on the Kamala Chameleon flip-flop phenomenon. Here is Kamala versus Kamala on the Biden-Harris economy.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Everyday prices are too high. Food, rent, gas, back-to-school clothes. That is called Bidenomics. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today. Ground beef is up almost 50%. There's not much left at the end of the month. Bidenomics is working. The price of housing has gone up. It feels so hard to just be able to get ahead. And we are very proud of Bidenomics.
The recent history of Harris backtracking on her political positions is legendary. Just in time for the 2024 presidential race, she has flip-flopped on banning fracking, imposing single-payer health insurance, and her support for the federal buyback of assault weapons. She now backs increased funding for border enforcement, and after opposing the border wall, she has even featured video of Trump's border wall in her campaign ads, as if this was her idea. As you can see, trying to pin down Kamala is like nailing Jell-O to a wall. But what worries us most of all is Kamala's confession to CNN's Dana Bash.
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
Unlike a company that gets your dollar by making promises it never keeps, there's no penalty when a politician lies and cheats his or her way into office. We know what Kamala Harris believes. We know the inflation, foreign wars, and racial turmoil the Biden-Harris administration created with a president far less radical than Kamala Harris. Anyone who votes for Harris believing what she says about her beliefs has become an easy mark for the progressives. Casting your ballot for Kamala Harris does not come with room for buyer's remorse, a 30-day vote-back guarantee, or any redo. These words were penned by King Solomon of Israel, renowned for his God-given wisdom. Although inspired 3,000 years ago, Solomon's words to us remain potent and timeless. They also perfectly picture the peril and opportunity presented to Americans as we select the next President of the United States. When it comes to immigration and our southern border, you're right, Solomon, there is nothing new under the sun. So, if history is to guide our future, let's see how Donald Trump handled the issue during his first term. Before Donald Trump became president in 2017, he recognized a problem which needed to be addressed and fixed. The Immigration Reform Control Act of 1986, which granted amnesty and a path to citizenship for 2.7 million illegal aliens, encouraged millions more to cross the border, following in their footsteps. In fact, a string of amnesty rulings followed, extending forgiveness to roughly 3 million more between 1986 and 2000. Another firestorm of controversy erupted over a 2014 policy established by President Obama, which became known as DACA, short for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Obama's order allowed 3.6 million children who had accompanied their parents on their way north to remain in the USA. Although ruled likely illegal by a Fifth Circuit federal court, the Obama administration turned a blind eye to the outcome and continued extending living and work permits to those covered by DACA, known as Dreamers. But Donald Trump and his supporters worked throughout his term in office to restore another dream, the American dream. He knew our security, rule of law, and customs were all under attack, and that something had to be done about it. So Trump promised his supporters he would build a wall.
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice. Build that wall. 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 So, we're going to build it. Who's going to pay for the wall? 100%. By the way, 100%.
And build it he did. As Trump's big, beautiful wall went up, illegal immigrant crossings went down during the Trump years, reaching a historic low in April 2020.
Less than 4 years ago, I handed this administration the strongest border in American history. But you can see on the chart that saved my life, that was the chart that saved my life. I said, look it, I'm so proud of it. I think it's one of the greatest. It was done by the Border Patrol, one of the greatest charts I've ever seen. It showed everything just like that. You know the chart. Oh, there it is. That's pretty good. Wow. Last time I put up that chart, I never really got to look at it.
This was the chart which Trump claimed saved his life. The chart shown to the crowd at Trump's July 2024 rally in Butler County, Pennsylvania, the moment a would-be assassin fired his rifle and missed. A closer look at its data reveals what happened as soon as the Biden-Harris team took over, and the numbers are not pretty.
I think the only thing that people in the United States and politicians can agree about on immigration is that the system is broken.
I think it's gotten more broken, if that's possible, in the 30 years that I've been working on the issue.
2023 saw record-breaking numbers of migrant crossings at the southwestern border, with Border Patrol reporting nearly 250,000 encounters in December alone.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poisoning the blood of our country.
The migration that we're seeing happening at the border right now is unsustainable. We are not managing it, and it is overwhelming our existing immigration systems.
There's broad consensus that it needs to be fixed. They just can't agree on what that way might be and how to think about that question.
So why is the immigration system in the U.S. so broken? And can it ever be fixed?
The shock to America's support system from the arrival of millions of illegal interlopers is but one small part of the tragic story. Among those invading our country were known terrorists and felons released from foreign prisons, gang members, murderers, rapists, child traffickers, and dealers in death.
And on February 27, 2022, our lives were shattered and our baby was gone. This was not an overdose, it was a poisoning. His whole future, everything we ever wanted for him was ripped away in an instant. And Joe Biden does nothing. I hold Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the border czar, what a joke, and Gavin Newsom and every Democrat who supports open borders responsible for the death of my son.
So what does candidate Kamala, Joe Biden's last person in the room, think about the wall? Apparently it depends on what day of the week it is.
We don't need a multi-billion-dollar wall. That wall ain't gonna stop them.
Let me be very clear. I'm not going to vote for a wall under any circumstances.
Harris said that she supports the bipartisan border bill, which includes requiring the Trump border wall.
But isn't Joe Biden's border czar allowed the occasional flip-flop?
This is a show of hands question, and hold them up for a moment so people can see. Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
When called out on her MIA status at the border by Lester Holt of NBC News, this misleading response was pure Kamala Harris.
Okay. Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
The choice before us could not be more clear. Over the past 8 years, we have seen the masterful Trump in action and Harris, the master of inaction. We've watched Trump build a wall to protect Americans.
Down with deportation! Up with education! Down with deportation! Up with education!
And Harris throw open the gates for political expediency. We have seen Donald Trump point America to a new vision of greatness and beheld Kamala Harris expose her own track record of incompetence, opportunism, and self-service. Comparing the two commanders-in-chief, Trump and Harris, is a rare gift. We can predict the outcome of our choice in advance, but this also leaves us with no excuse. How will you vote, and what will be the outcome of this election in 2024? Let's read it again together. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. It was God who separated mankind into people groups with different languages. He alone created people groups which became nation states. Since the events of Genesis chapter 11, mankind has worked to reverse the curse of Babel by laying the groundwork for global governance. In this segment, we will assess mankind's progress toward establishing a new global order. How the major party candidates for president in the 2024 U.S. election embrace or oppose the globalist plans. So how is the push for this bipolar one-world government going? At its most recent session, the United Nations adopted a Pact for the Future as a forerunner to the new global order. Dustin Haskins, senior fellow at the Heartland Institute, explained the Pact for the Future to radio host Glenn Beck.
Yes, so the Pact for the Future is a very large document, includes tons and tons of commitments by member nations. It was approved by basically the entire United Nations over the weekend including the United States. In fact, Secretary Blinken yesterday afternoon gave a speech praising the Pacts of the Future. So it includes all kinds of radical provisions. Probably the most important one, the one that we've been looking at most closely, is something called the Emergency Platform. The idea behind this is to give sweeping powers to the UN Secretary General in the event of a future, what they call global shock, which is not clearly defined in the document.
Conservative commentator Kenan Spivak has been tracking this elitist threat for years and shares his thoughts.
At the center of the movement for the so-called liberal international rules-based order are organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, organizations that push for policies that undermine the sovereignty of individual nations, particularly the United States. Globalist treaties and compacts usurp the U.S. Constitution and law. Complicit Democrat presidents who ignore the Constitution's requirement that the Senate approve of all treaties enter into these compacts that claim to override our Constitution and government and cede power to unelected, self-styled elites.
Even as the UN works feverishly to assert control over our lives during its self-declared emergencies, the World Economic Forum works not so quietly behind the scenes to set its globalist agenda for the coming world. The best take we found on the work of the World Economic Forum came from former presidential candidate and Trump supporter Robert F. Kennedy Jr. when he appeared on the Glenn Beck podcast.
Where do you stand on the WEF, the World Economic Forum?
It is like, we shouldn't be paying any attention. It's a billionaires' boys club as arranging the world to shift wealth upward and to clamp down totalitarian controls on everybody else. And now they got the capacity to do it. They got all these countries running around doing what they tell them to do. It's astonishing to me that, these people go to Davos in their private jets.
Yes.
And they're able to tell these world leaders, how to govern us in ways that eradicate our constitutional and civil rights and constantly shifting wealth. I mean, COVID, we shifted $4 trillion of wealth upward. We closed all the little guys.
Yeah.
And
Home
we made
Depot
Amazon
was open,
rich,
but
and Google,
yeah.
and they're all colluding with each other to censor the people who are like me who are complaining about it.
A leading contributor to the WEF is historian and author Yuval Noah Harari, who suggests a novel solution to the problem of faith-based divisions and which God to worship. Stop me if you've heard this before, like maybe in the Garden of Eden, but Harari predicts mankind is about to become God.
Humanity's next targets are likely to be immortality, happiness, and divinity. Having reduced mortality from starvation, disease, and violence, we will now aim to overcome old age and even death itself. And having raised humanity above the beastly level of survival struggles, we will now aim to upgrade humans into gods and turn Homo sapiens into Homo Deus.
Don't get too excited, though. Harari says you may have no purpose in remaining here.
And now fast forward to the early 21st century, when we just don't need the vast majority of the population, because the future is about developing more and more sophisticated technology, like, again, artificial intelligence, bioengineering. Most people don't contribute anything to that, except perhaps for their data. And whatever people are still doing, which is useful, these technologies increasingly will make redundant and will make it possible to replace the people.
So Yuval Noah Harari says you will be a god, but a replaceable god. And what happens to those who do not find a place in his dystopian globalist future? For you, Harari says there will be drugs, video games, and extinction. Harari's philosophy helps guide the elites to formulate their plan for our globalist future. Again, we turn to Kenan Spivak to clarify the globalist plan.
Their aim is to consolidate power into the hands of the few, stripping away the independence of nations so that global governance can take hold. Our high standard of living, strong military and moral backbone stand in the way. But why would the shining city on a hill cede its position to these global elitists? They found accomplices in our government, media, and religious institutions who would degrade the moral, financial, and military underpinnings of our nation. Some of these people received cash and other favors, while still others received promises of being part of this new ruling global elite. Billions of dollars are given away overseas while our people suffer. Meanwhile, far from the eyes of average Americans, unelected elites gather in places like Davos to discuss the future of the world. They are not accountable to you or to our government, and yet they wield immense influence over governments, corporations, and media alike.
Comparing today's America to that of 40 or 50 years ago, we can see how far down the slippery slope we have slid. The process is so far along that this election may be our last fork in the road, determining which route America chooses: a Marxist, globalist, elitist oligarchy, or a return to the constitutional republic won for us with the blood of the patriots at Yorktown in 1781. Democrat Kamala Harris is linked at the hip with the policies of the current president, Joe Biden. In fact, he recently told the ladies of ABC's The View that he could delegate any of his responsibilities to Vice President Harris.
And as vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do. And so I was able to delegate her responsibility on everything from foreign policy to domestic policy.
As the last person in the room, Harris claimed credit for the failed withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, which saw 13 of them killed in action by a Taliban suicide bomber.
Vice President Kamala Harris confirmed she played a pivotal role in President Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan in an interview with CNN's Dana Bash on Sunday.
He just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room? Yes. And you feel comfortable?
I do.
Fox News contributor Pete Hegseth told commentator Mark Levin.
First of all, she's a Marxist at home, and then she's a globalist and apologist overseas. And you know, most empires lose their influence around the world because they lose their compass at home. That certainly happened under Obama. It's fast forwarded under Biden, and under Marxist Kamala Harris, Comrade Kamala, it would accelerate. We know exactly who she is. She is a radical, cratering our sense of self, our southern border, our national identity, our love of country, and certainly our military, as you've talked about, as I wrote about in The War on Warriors. When all of that happens, the world takes notice.
So why has the world not taken notice of the 325,000 children Kamala Harris lost track of during her term as Joe Biden's border czar? Donald Trump wants to know.
Harris lost. Listen to these numbers, though. Seriously, if this were a Republican, they'd be stringing them up. Now listen to this number, because you have to understand what it means. 325,000 children have been lost. They've been allowed to be trafficked all across our borders. She flew in illegal aliens by the hundreds of thousands, and many of these were young children. But we have no idea where, think of the number, 325,000 children are missing. Many are dead. Many are involved in sex operations. Many are working as slaves in different parts of probably this country and probably many others. But she was the border czar. Now she says, I wasn't the border czar. But she was. It was headlines, border czar, border czar. But now she doesn't want that term. But whether she was a border czar or not, she was in charge of the border.
Republican Donald Trump, however, believes in rebuilding the greatness of the American economy. He's an experienced, highly successful businessman who has amassed a fortune worth billions of dollars, money he earned in the private sector.
Before he was president-elect, Donald Trump was the king of the Big Apple.
My name's Donald Trump, and I'm the largest real estate developer in New York.
And 30 years ago, he bypassed the city's signature yellow taxis for this $10 million French Air L'Especial helicopter. He took Barbara Walters for a ride.
What do you feel like when you look at that wonderful skyline?
Well, I look at that skyline, Barbara, and I really say it's the greatest in the world. I'd really like to buy everything if that were possible.
A real estate tycoon overlooking his empire, salivating at the possibilities. Nothing seemed too sacred. Almost.
And what about Central Park?
No, I think Donald Trump should not be allowed to touch Central Park.
He's a man with few limits.
Trump did not limit himself from a possible run for the presidency one day, teasing the run with a salivating Oprah.
Oprah Winfrey is speaking out about this video that's gone viral of Donald Trump in 1988.
I know people have talked to you about whether or not you want to run. Would you ever?
I would never want to rule it out totally because I really am tired of seeing what's happening with this country.
Oprah's best friend, Gayle King, wanted to know what she thinks about the Trump interview now.
When I asked that question, I didn't expect that answer. No.
And check this out. It's another lost video of young Donald Trump. This is from 1980, and he was interviewed by Tom Brokaw on The Today Show.
Mr. Trump, what's left in your life? You're 33 years old. You're worth all this money. You say you didn't say that you want to be worth $1 billion.
No, I really don't. I just want to keep busy and keep active and be interested in what I do.
This country loves celebrity, and they love rich, and he's both celebrity and rich, and people want to be identified.
Funny how Oprah changed her tune on the Donald after he announced his plans to make America great again.
Oprah Winfrey, who I used to know well, she used to love me until I decided to run for politics. Oh, let's go to Mar-a-Lago, Donald. I love the place so much. No, she used to love me, but once I ran for politics, that was the end of that, and that was okay with me. I couldn't care less because we got to make our country great again. We're going to make it great again, greater than ever before.
And how does Donald Trump approach the international community? What does he think of their globalist plans?
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
In just 4 years, he reshaped the international norms, pulling America out of key agreements, including the Paris Climate Accord, the Iranian nuclear deal, and the UN Human Rights Council. From day one, he set his sights on NATO, the bedrock of transatlantic defense for over 7 decades.
Countries that aren't fulfilling their commitment, and those countries are going to be dealt with. Maybe I'll deal with them from a trade standpoint. Maybe I'll deal with them in a different way. I'll work something out where they have to pay. But, we don't want to have people delinquent.
That is the Trump style. Other nations pay their fair share. It's another part of his promise to make America great again and keep his word to the American people. We close this segment by looking back to a day in January 2017 when Donald J. Trump took the oath of office.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Might history and Donald Trump be on the verge of repeating themselves? Just for a moment, let's picture a worst-case scenario. It's January 2025. And Kamala Harris has just been sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. What would her globalist administration mean for the United States military? Will she steer us into war? Possibly a multi-front war? Possibly World War III? Fortunately, we have an alternative to Armageddon. We can compare the military readiness and leadership under the administration of our 45th President, Donald J. Trump, with the foreboding future likely to materialize under Kamala Harris. To do so, we will utilize expert analysis and commentary showing how a variety of woke factors, including diversity, equity, and inclusion promotion, have eroded military effectiveness. We begin with these eye-opening revelations from reporter Sharyl Attkisson's podcast, Full Measure.
With rising tensions around the world, a large question looms. How many wars is the U.S. military prepared to fight at the same time? Lisa Fletcher speaks with an expert who warns our adversaries are producing ships, bombs, and bullets faster than we are.
What is the state of the U.S. industrial base right now to make equipment and munitions?
Well, the state is not good. So in the 70s and 80s, we were producing hundreds of tanks a year. in the 1990s, when we talked about that peace dividends, the Defense Department called all the defense contractors in, and there were like 50 major defense contractors, and told them all to consolidate. And we thought we could command efficiency of production, and that has never worked and will never work.
General John Ferrari says the U.S. military strategy is to produce just enough weapons and equipment to prepare for and sustain one war at a time.
And that's one of the reasons we haven't pumped the money into the industrial base that we need to build it for multiple wars or wars of long duration.
Although the trend toward right-sizing the military to fight one war at a time began in the 90s and continued through the endless wars fostered by neocons on both sides of the political aisle, President Donald Trump recognized the depleted state of our war supplies and the lack of military preparedness that existed when he campaigned in 2016.
Immediately after taking office, I will ask my generals to present to me a plan within 30 days to defeat and destroy ISIS. This will require military warfare, but also cyber warfare, financial warfare, and ideological warfare. We will build an active army of around 540,000. As the Army's Chief of Staff has said, he needs desperately and really must have to protect our country.
He acted immediately to restore American military might and protect our populace from those living in dangerous regimes, as Donald Trump rapidly made America's military great again.
President Trump signed 2 executive orders here at the Pentagon, one focused on military readiness, increasing the size of the military, and updating the nuclear arsenal. The other concerns extreme vetting of those applying for visas and halts all refugee admission and resettlement for Syrians for 120 days or until further notice. The overall number of refugees welcomed into the United States will be cut in half. Priority will be given to Christians who say they were persecuted.
Sadly, billions of dollars in military assets purchased for American taxpayers by Donald Trump were squandered by Kamala Harris during the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. The vice president claimed she was the last person in the room as the plans for that doomed operation, which killed 13 U.S. service members, were formulated and carried out. And that means the buck stops with her.
The danger had been building for days. Desperate Afghans trying to get out, U.S. Marines trying to help while securing the Kabul airport. This image is what the bomber would have seen approaching the airport's Abbey Gate on that August afternoon. Masses of people lining a canal. And for the first time, we see the suicide blast itself. It is only a few seconds and some 50 yards away, but slow it down and you see a lone figure dressed in black, who investigators now say was the bomber.
In the end, her failed policy would also prove responsible for the deaths of Afghan citizens so desperate to evade the Taliban that they fell to their deaths after clinging to the side of the last C-17 cargo plane leaving that country. Harris' lack of commitment to our military was exposed by the ABC debate with President Trump when she claimed, as of today, there's not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century.
However, some military service members are indeed stationed in areas that the United States considers combat zones. Around 2,500 troops are in Iraq and Syria to fight against Islamic State militants. Thousands of service members have also been deployed to the Middle East after the war in Gaza erupted in October of last year. Meanwhile, several U.S. military personnel have been killed or injured this year, including in Jordan, Syria, and off the coast of Somalia. Now, in response to the vice president's comments, several troops wearing combat gear have posted sarcastic videos questioning if she knew their locations.
It did not take Biden-Harris long to squander the strong military edge it inherited from the Trump 45 administration. This year alone, $66 billion in equipment and munitions were lavished upon Ukraine, a country which is not part of the NATO alliance. Now the Pentagon is cutting back those shipments over concerns about our own dwindling stockpiles. And then There's the issue of shrinking enlistment in the U.S. military. One reason for the drop in military numbers was the COVID vaccination, forced upon every member of the armed services. 8,000 were drummed out of the military without honorable discharges for refusing the shot. Only recently were they given the opportunity to re-enlist, and just 43 of them responded to that offer. And many of those who have enrolled in our military academies are being indoctrinated into radical leftist teachings. In essence, changing duty, honor, and country to diversity, equity, and inclusion. How can our land survive? Who can we turn to? Unlike the neocons of both parties, Donald Trump is not a globalist. He puts America and Americans first. However, the neocons and socialists never met a war they didn't love. During the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton falsely claimed that a Trump presidency would result in World War III. That did not happen then and will not happen now. But we can also see how the Biden-Harris administration has pushed us to the brink.
By the way, the war with Russia would have never started with Ukraine, would have never started if I was president. October 7th would have never happened. Iran was broke. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for Hezbollah. This is a very dangerous time that we're in. It's dangerous in terms of crime and all, but it's very dangerous in terms of a possible World War III. We're very close to World War III, and people don't realize it. We're closer than we've ever been, I think, ever since World War II, but this would be the war of wars because of weaponry. This isn't, as I say, two army tanks going back and forth shooting at each other. The level of power, the level of weaponry that there is in the world today is so bad, it's so dangerous, it's so bad. And you need the right person to be president. You know, we had no war when I was president, except that I totally defeated 100% of the ISIS caliphate. Everyone said it would take 5 years. It took me like about 4 weeks.
For the sake of your family, for the sake of our country, vote wisely on November 5th. There's an old saying which demands our attention, especially during this election season. There's nothing certain but death and taxes. Given the control being exerted over Kamala by never-Trump neocons and the military-industrial complex, the death part of that equation is virtually a given. And considering Comrade Kamala's Marxist upbringing and leanings, you can bet her plans to tax you into poverty are assured as well. Just so we're all on the same page, Merriam-Webster.com defines neocon as 1. A former liberal espousing political conservatism, and 2. A conservative who advocates the assertive promotion of democracy and U.S. national interest in international affairs through military means. Of course, that does not describe President Donald Trump, who wants to end wars, save lives, and cut needless cash giveaways to support international military misadventures. The rogues gallery of rebel Republicans realigning with despotic Democrats is growing daily. More than 200 former staff members of George W. Bush, John McCain, and Mitt Romney have jumped ship to join Kamala. Some of the more notable insiders who showed their true stripes are former Republicans Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, and her father, the former Vice President Dick Cheney. Previously, Dick Cheney was universally despised by Democrats. Now they've turned on a dime and love him. It's part of the 2024 political plumb line, dividing America into globalists versus nationalists, big money elitists versus populists, never-Trumpers versus ever-Trumpers. As you might expect, two candidates promoting such different agendas for America also will advance wildly diverging tax policies. Republican Donald Trump wants to reduce the tax burden on the average American, and he did just that during his first administration when he cut tax rates and taxes for Americans at all levels of the economic ladder, despite the lies told by Democrats who don't want voters to know the truth. After Trump announced his plan to help those working in the service industry,
we are going to not charge taxes on tips, people making tips.
In no time at all, Kamala Harris stole Trump's tax plan.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
Not to be outdone, Trump upped the ante.
We're not going to charge tax to Social Security, the seniors. We're not going to do it. We're not going to charge. And also tax. I say the two things. We're going to have no tax on seniors, Social Security, and we're going to have no tax on tips. Very simple.
But Trump is not done cutting taxes. He announced reduced corporate income taxes to spur economic growth, and
today, I'm also announcing that as part of our additional tax cuts, we will end all taxes on overtime. You know what that means? Think of that.
Trump also wants to put more of the cost of running our government on foreign interests, reducing the burden on U.S. taxpayers.
Former President Donald Trump has said he wants to make the federal government's revenue less reliant on taxes and more on tariffs. He would impose a 10% tariff across the board on all imported goods, and for anything imported from China, the tariff would be 60%. This, he says, would be balanced by tax cuts.
As for Harris-specific tax policies for the average American, we're still waiting.
Harris has not released a formal economic plan just yet, but economists expect her to remain aligned with Biden's vision.
What do we know about Kamala's tax proposals? Conservative commentator Kenan Spivak has researched the topic, and her revealed positions are downright scary.
For openers, Kamala Harris has proposed taxing Americans on unrealized capital gains. That means if you own real estate, stocks, or other investments, the government would track your paper gains. Harris says she wants to impose this tax only on wealthy Americans worth more than $100 million. But we know it's only a matter of time before all of us will be completing these tax returns and paying tax on unrealized capital gains. This could drive farmers and homeowners into bankruptcy. It could destroy small businesses and eliminate good jobs. It would be a disaster for the U.S. economy and the American people. And that's just for starters.
There's more?
She split with Biden only on the size of the increase she wants on the capital gains tax rate. Biden wanted to double the rate to about 40%, where Harris is willing to accept about a 50% increase to 28%. That's on top of state and local taxes. The Tax Foundation estimates that Harris's tax proposals would cost us $4 trillion over the next 10 years through combination of income tax increases and reduced income. That would actually reduce the size of the U.S. economy by 2% and make us much less competitive.
How can Americans vote for a candidate who plans to raise taxes and kill the American dream? But like we said, with Kamala Harris as president, the only things certain are death and taxes. In the last 100 years, no administration has been more racist than the Biden-Harris administration. Disregarding our Constitution, founding principles, and more than 200 years of progress toward a colorblind society, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are laser-focused on dividing Americans by race, sex, and sexual orientation, and then allocating jobs, promotions, contracts, loans, and even health care solely on the color of an American's skin. Harris has taken a lead in promoting so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, an unconstitutional, racially discriminatory scheme that seeks to allocate all of America's opportunities and benefits to be proportional to each group's percentage of our population, without regard to qualifications, experience, aptitude, or even interest. Conservative commentator Kenan Spivak attacks the DEI issue head-on.
In 1863, a Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, issued the Emancipation Proclamation. 2 years later, a Republican Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which guaranteed Americans of all races and colors equality in property and contract rights. 2 years later, Republicans pushed through the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, guaranteeing equal protection of the laws to all Americans. and in 1964, when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it was again Republicans in Congress who passed that into law. While America has not achieved a perfect record on racial equality, the goal has been to strive for a colorblind society. In the 1970s, however, liberal universities adopted so-called affirmative action, with separate admission tracks for black students who couldn't meet the normal admission standards. After President Donald Trump appointed 3 conservative justices, the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action for violating the 14th Amendment. By doing so, the court restored the premise that university admissions must be based on merit, capabilities, and achievement.
Over the last 30 years, far-left radicals like Harris have advanced so-called critical race theory and intersectionality. They divide the world into oppressors and the oppressed. The United States and white people top their list of oppressors. One of their main goals has been to ignore the Constitution and adopt DEI to replace merit, hard work, and equality.
Let's have a look at Kamala Harris giving her thoughts on why equality is a bad thing.
To that extent, yes, we do talk about equity. We actually believe it is a good principle, in spite what some so-called leaders might try to suggest. We are proud of the fact that equity is one of our guiding principles. Proud of the fact that we understand equality is important, but not everybody starts out on the same base. So it sounds like it might be right, everyone gets an equal share and then they should compete and the best thing will win, but that assumes everyone starts out on the same base. Equity takes into account that that may not be the case.
Sorry, Madam Vice President, that's a hard no from me, because just like communism, treating people differently so they all wind up in the same place is a bad idea. Oh wait, hang on, that is communism.
On the very first day of the Biden-Harris administration, President Biden issued an executive order requiring the whole of government to embed DEI in all aspects of federal government policies and American lives. Then, the administration issued repeated orders incorporating DEI in every aspect of federal government hiring, promotion, contracting, education, and health care.
The Biden-Harris administration's infamous Infrastructure Act of 2021 and its so-called American Rescue Act of 2022 allocated billions of dollars to ensure the growth of DEI for restaurants, farmers, small businesses, homeowners, and construction companies alike. To date, more than 140 federal agencies have adopted DEI plans. No one may be promoted at the State Department who doesn't pledge fealty to DEI. Secret Service agents, special forces, doctors, and healthcare recipients are selected based on their race, sex, or sexual orientation. We learned during Hurricane Helene that the #1 mission for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is DEI, not rescuing Americans. The Secret Service has decided that at least 30% of its agents must be women. Remember that brave Secret Service woman who wrapped around Donald Trump during the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania? It's not her fault that Trump towered over her, exposing his torso and head. What about that female agent who had difficulty holstering her sidearm? You decide whether she was a DEI hire. The administration has also prioritized COVID-19 tests and vaccines by race and allocated $260 million to teach Black Americans how to fill out forms. That's just plain insulting to blacks.
Kamala Harris is not only a committed advocate for DEI, but also for the payment of reparations by people who never owned a slave to people who never were slaves. A socialist wealth distribution scheme where all that matters is the color of someone's skin. The Supreme Court observed that distinctions between citizens solely because of their ancestry are by their very nature odious to a free people. Chief Justice John Roberts observed, "The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race." the majority of Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white Americans oppose admissions and hiring by race. They believe fairness and American exceptionalism are based on merit and hard work. Equality of opportunity advances the values of hard work, education, and merit. Those values serve all of us. Ignoring those principles and instead incorporating racism and sexism in everything we do through DEI is morally wrong, unconstitutional, and ultimately will destroy the U.S. economy, military preparedness, and the most inclusive society in human history. There is only one path forward to avoid that outcome. Donald Trump and Republicans abhor racial discrimination and seek equality of opportunity for all Americans. Kamala Harris and most Democrats seek to slice and dice Americans by race, color, sex, and sexual orientation. If they're not stopped, American exceptionalism will come to an end.
And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
On July 13, 2024, President Donald J. Trump was addressing an outdoor rally in Butler County, Pennsylvania, when by the grace of God, his right ear only was grazed by a would-be assassin's bullet. Less than 2 months later, Trump's political life would be on the line. Could this moving target named Donald J. Trump survive a brutal 3-on-1 nationally televised tag team cage match conducted in the ring of public opinion by ABC News? The very first question from moderator David Muir set the tone for the debate when he asked Kamala Harris if we're better off today than we were 3.5 years ago. This gave the audience an illusion of fairness from a moderator who likely knew Kamala would never answer the question. As expected, when Kamala incredulously began babbling about her childhood, the moderators handed her a total pass. But they let Trump get away with nothing. After that opening question, any facade of fair play was dropped by ABC News. This was nothing less than Trump in the lion's den, as our 45th president was constantly bullied, harassed, and lied to and about by his opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, assisted openly by Muir and fellow moderator Lindsey Davis. By the way, this debate garnered 67 million viewers, according to Nielsen. An aside, did you know Dana Walden, one of the top executives at the Walt Disney Company, the owner of ABC News, is a close friend of Kamala Harris? In fact, a Washington Times report quoted Kamala joking how Walden had introduced her to Doug Emhoff, the man who would become her husband. Looks like for this debate, the fix was in, and Kamala Harris would be free to say whatever she liked unchecked. And so she did.
What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side.
And Trump was fact-checked by both moderators, David Muir and Lindsey Davis, not once.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Not twice.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio.
Not 3 times.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm. Lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it.
Not 4 times.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country.
But 5 times during the debate.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi.
Meanwhile, as Kamala continued to spread her disinformation,
nowhere in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion.
The gaslighting moderators shielded Kamala from even one fact check. Together they form the unholy trinity: see no evil, hear no evil, and evil. But Donald Trump stoically, heroically swatted away those lies like flies at a Sunday school picnic, pinning her to the mat with this epic closing statement.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
Why indeed, Mr. President? America is waking up to the truth. Democratic presidential hopeful Kamala Harris is a big believer in constitutional rights. Her constitutional rights. As for you and me and the rights of the rest of us, not so much. Her elitist stripes showed through during her recently televised sit-down love fest with television personality Oprah Winfrey. Ensconced in what she considered to be a safe environment, Harris let down her guard and revealed a shocking truth to Oprah and 1.5 million of their close friends.
I'm a gun owner. Tim Walz is a gun. I did not know that. If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Probably should not have said that. But my staff will deal with that later.
Yeah.
She wants to send the police into our homes just to make sure that we're responsible with our Second Amendment rights. But she may have them confiscate your so-called assault weapons on the way out.
Yes, I am a gun owner, and Tim Walz is a gun owner, and we're not trying to take anybody's guns away from them. But we do need an assault weapons ban.
And how quickly does she plan to start grabbing your guns?
Upon being elected, I will give the United States Congress 100 days to get their act together and have the courage to pass reasonable gun safety laws. And if they fail to do it, then I will take executive action. And
Kamala Harris would never attempt to violate your First Amendment rights, would she? Well, let's find out how she treated undercover reporter David Daleiden, founder and project lead for the Center of Medical Progress. As California Attorney General, Kamala Harris shielded her friends at Planned Parenthood after Daleiden exposed them in an undercover video operation for selling baby parts. Harris sent 11 police to his apartment to seize his electronic equipment used in distributing the truth.
It is your First Amendment right to promote the significance of your own message. When she said that I was targeted because of the content of my videos, Kamala Harris's deputy prosecutor admitted that the reason that I was targeted and I alone was to punish what I have to say. Planned Parenthood sells baby parts. That's why I'm suing Kamala Harris, the California Attorney General, Planned Parenthood, and others in Los Angeles federal court for conspiracy to violate First Amendment civil rights.
Kamala Harris is not opposed to all reporters. Quite the contrary. She has many powerful friends in the mainstream media who are tilting the political pinball table in her favor. In his nightly newscast before the televised debate, ABC anchorman David Muir put his political gamesmanship skills on full display. The Media Research Center analyzed Muir's performance as 100% positive for Harris and 93% negative on Trump. No wonder Harris' Republican opponent, President Donald Trump, refers to him and the rest of the mainstream media as
Everybody back there, the fake news media, look at all of them.
When you control the media, you can also control what polls the American people are shown. You can cherry-pick polls that show your candidate in the best light, no matter how unscientific or skewed the data may be. GOP vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance knows.
Here's how much weight I put in those polls, and I want to be as precise as I possibly can, 0. That is how much weight I put in those polls. And look, we have, I believe, in our campaign, the very best pollsters working for us, and trust me, we feel extremely good about Pennsylvania and the whole country. Just let me give you a very precise example. I remember the fake media polls in my Ohio Senate race that told us that we were going to lose, and this wasn't in September, this was October, that I was going to lose my Ohio Senate race. And then I had a pollster who said, you know what, we're going to win, and we're going to win by 7 points. And then I won by 7 points. I trust that pollster more than I trust the fake media pollsters. But
controlling the narrative politically is part of the broader global effort to prevent freedom of speech and even freedom of thought. In 2020, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres wanted only the official narrative on COVID-19 to flourish.
COVID-19 is not just a public health emergency, it is a communications emergency too. As soon as the virus spread across the globe, inaccurate and even dangerous messages proliferated wildly over social media, leaving people confused, misled, and ill-advised. The antidote lies in making sure that science-backed facts and health guidance circulate even faster and reach people wherever they access information. This will be especially critical as we work to build public confidence in the safety and efficacy of a future COVID-19 set of vaccines.
By the time the real scientific truth about COVID and its most effective treatment were revealed, millions around the world were dead, either from the disease itself or from its ineffective, reactionary aftermath. And those deemed guilty of spreading alleged misinformation about the jabs were often vindicated, ironically enough, by science.
And we continue now looking at Senator Harris and her time as California's Attorney General and now Senator, including her questioning of President Trump's judicial nominees over their membership in the Knights of Columbus. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, it's important to note that in the Senate, Kamala Harris has twice sponsored the Do Not Harm Act, which essentially prevents religious freedom protections from harming third parties. Critics say that all it does is prevent people from practicing their faith in public. And they also say that it's another example of Harris going after religious freedoms.
Senator Harris has been crystal clear what she believes.
Katie Glenn of Americans United for Life says Senator Kamala Harris has a record of grilling Catholic judges nominated to sit on federal courts and who also belong to the Knights of Columbus.
Stating that being a member of the Knights was a bridge too far, that any member of the Knights is not eligible for the federal bench, which suggests any Catholic is not eligible.
Kamala Harris may be leading the charge against our constitutional protections in this election, but she's not alone. The push to muzzle and enslave us is a widespread, long-standing liberal agenda which has come to the fore in the 2024 election. Conservative commentator Kenan Spivak shares with us his thoughts on the process.
If Harris's positions were popular, she would talk about them. But because her positions appeal only to a small percentage of voters, she has to pretend to be someone she is not. And because Trump's positions on the issues appeal to most Americans, she has to trick voters into seeing him as extreme, even though he is not. From being opposed to fracking, to supporting reparations and defunding the police, to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and transgenderism, including the belief that government should pay for gender reassignment surgery for illegal alien prisoners, to her belief that illegal immigration should be decriminalized and that we should pay for health care and education for all illegal aliens, to opposing the death penalty for cop killers, supporting mandates for electric vehicles and banning many home appliances, stacking the Supreme Court so progressives gain control of the one branch of government they don't already control, and repeated scandals during her time as San Francisco District Attorney and California Attorney General, Kamala Harris is firmly on the far left fringe of the Democrat Party. By remaining purposely vague on Israel's right of defense, largely silent about the outbreak of anti-Semitism in the United States and Hamas' October 7 attack on Israel, boycotting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress, and selecting far-left advisors for outreach to Jews and Muslims. Harris is demonstrating that she is prepared to abandon America's closest ally in the Middle East, Israel, and her fealty to the radical perspective that America, Israel, whites, and Jews are the world's leading oppressors, and so-called marginalized minorities are the oppressed.
The date was April 4th, 2007, and the late prophet Kim Clement uttered these shocking words that would chart the course for the life of a future U.S. president.
Trump shall become a trumpet!
Clement further described this coming president as fearless.
There's a president who will come. And God says he will have absolutely no fear.
Which leads us to the events of July 13th, 2024. Donald Trump had taken the stage at a Butler County, Pennsylvania rally just minutes before and was pointing to a chart on immigration when bullets rang out.
And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Trump emerged from the stage, his ear bloodied, but the candidate unbowed, raising his hand in Trump's landmark response, "Fight, fight, fight!" No, Donald Trump would never surrender to fear. He did not quit the race that day. In fact, he maintained his busy campaign schedule of both indoor and outdoor rallies and scheduled a return visit to the site where a crazed young gunman named Thomas Matthew Crooks had nearly ended his life.
In the social media post, Trump says he will honor Corey Comparator, David Dutch, and James Copenhaver. Tomorrow marks 2 weeks since Trump held that rally in Butler.
The threats to Trump did not end there. Fueled by crazed partisan rhetoric from media and political sources calling Trump a threat to democracy and Adolf Hitler. Watch as Whoopi Goldberg of The View compares Trump to a bug, and President Joe Biden displays his official knee-jerk response.
Then he just wouldn't go. He was like a bug. He just kept being there. He was like a bug right there. Zzz. So you felt...
Joe Biden's Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, gave viral voice to Biden's slapstick.
It's just another lie. Like, how did we get here? Let's extinguish him for good.
Yes, others found their places in line to end Trump's life and candidacy. One warm Sunday afternoon in September, gunshots echoed across Trump's Mar-a-Lago golf course as he shot a round of golf with friends. The would-be assassin, 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth, was nabbed after his license plate was passed along to Florida authorities. Ruth awaits trial in a West Palm Beach federal court on charges of trying to kill the former president and illegal possession of firearms. The threats just keep on coming, as we hear from Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz.
And I'll break a little news for you. I had a senior official from the Department of Homeland Security in my office before the second assassination attempt saying that what he has assessed is that there are 5 known assassination teams in the United States, 3 inspired by other governments, 2 that are here that are known domestic assassination teams. And with that, this individual was coming to me concerned that the force protection around President Trump, even prior to that second assassination attempt, was not sufficient.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate released a damning report blaming Secret Service failures leading up to the Butler County shooting.
The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee releasing their report this morning after conducting a dozen interviews with the Secret Service personnel responsible for planning and securing Trump's Butler rally. Now, the committee found that Secret Service, quote, failed to ensure the AGR roof was adequately covered by either U.S. Secret Service or local counter snipers. The report also revealing a Secret Service agent specifically requested drone equipment days before the rally, but it was denied with no explanation. And the committee can confirm Secret Service knew about a suspicious person with a rangefinder for at least 27 minutes before shots were fired, but they allowed former President Trump to stay on stage. The Secret Service counter sniper said seeing officers with their guns drawn elevated the threat level, but notifying someone to get Trump off of the stage did not, quote, cross his mind.
We wonder why threats continue against just one candidate for president, but we continue praying for the protection of both candidates. Donald Trump, who has shed blood to defend his country, and Kamala Harris, who, to our knowledge, remains untargeted and in good health. They say the Vice President of the United States is just one heartbeat away from the Oval Office, which makes the 2024 vice presidential horse race critical for U.S. citizens. In Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Walz, you could not find two more opposite contenders. J.D. Vance, a young, smart, former Marine who raised himself up by his bootstraps from a family background of drugs and poverty, and with the help of God became an Ivy League graduate, successful attorney, best-selling author, and the subject of a full-length feature film. Oh, and did we mention he also was elected to serve the people of Ohio in the United States Senate?
Yeah, now projecting that J.D. Vance, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, wins in Ohio. And this is a must-win for Republicans if they want to have any chance of taking control of the United States Senate.
And then there's Vance's Democrat opponent, former six-term congressman and governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, a mature man who wears his feelings on his face. During the campaign, Walz sullied the character of his military service in the Minnesota National Guard by misrepresenting his record, including his rank, leaving the service before his unit was shipped out to a battle zone in Iraq, and then lying again, claiming Walz served in a battle zone. As we become better acquainted with Tim Walz, we discover his version of the truth stretches like silly putty, and that lying is really just misspeaking.
Qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
While it's true Vance has not always been a vocal supporter of his Republican running mate, the candidate explained his change of heart about Donald Trump to CBS moderator Margaret Brennan in this year's one and only down-ticket debate.
And you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed.
At least Vance had the courage to delineate his decision. Unlike Kamala Harris, when she was asked to explain by CNN's Dana Bash about her wildly shifting policy positions, just in time for the 2024 election.
Generally speaking, how should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
As you may recall, during the presidential debate, ABC hosts mercilessly fact-checked Donald Trump during the debate, but handled Kamala Harris with kid gloves. However, when CBS' Margaret Brennan tried fact-checking Vance during the vice presidential debate, he would have none of it, reminding his hosts how their meddling interrogation violated rules of the debate.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
During the dialogue, Vance proved a fearless defender of Donald Trump, the man and his agenda to make America great again.
Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers.
At times, Walz reacted like the proverbial deer in the headlights. At other times, his habit of misspeaking landed him in hot water with both friend and foe alike.
Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters.
Although an obvious slip of the lip, perhaps a Freudian slip, conservative commentator Tucker Carlson and GOP Senator Mike Lee were not willing to give Walz a pass.
Yeah. Apparently, he's become great friends with school shooters. I don't know what that means, but that was perhaps the greatest presidential or vice presidential debate flop in living memory. I mean, that's right up there with some of my best friends' own NASCAR teams. That's just, it's not didn't come across as the speaker intended.
Still other times, Walz simply lied, as he did when discussing the Minnesota bill he signed into law on abortion. It allows babies to be killed in the womb right up through the 9th month. Lets doctors ignore providing life-saving care to babies who survive abortions, literally letting the newborn baby gasping for life die on the table. And it may even impact freedom of conscience for those employed by sectarian healthcare facilities. The exchange speaks volumes.
But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will?
But a TV reporter from WCCO TV in Minneapolis verified that claims made in ads released by a Minnesota pro-life group were true. The bill Walz signed allows no restrictions on abortion in the state at any stage of gestation.
Yeah, Amy and Kelsey, those ads focus on an abortion law that was passed here last year, as well as an equal rights amendment that's under consideration this year.
Use. Abortion up to birth isn't compassionate. It's way out there.
Minnesota citizens concerned for life took to the airwaves to campaign against a state law allowing abortions at any stage, right up until childbirth.
We know that these do happen, and we know that late-term abortionists across the country are saying, come to Minnesota.
State statistics show that's hyperbole. Abortions later in pregnancy do happen in Minnesota, but they are extremely rare.
Most potentially damaging of all to the Democrat ticket are new allegations about Walz's apparent ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
Capitol Hill, Harris's running mate under investigation for his ties to China. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer asking the FBI for information about the connections Tim Walz has had to the CCP for the past few decades. Walz spent a year teaching in China and said he has visited the country around 30 times. In a letter to the FBI, Comer said in part, Walz has connections to CCP-connected entities and officials that make him susceptible to the party's strategy of elite capture, which seeks to co-opt influential figures in elite political, cultural, and academic circles to influence the United States to the benefit of the communist regime and the detriment of Americans.
Is it even possible that in Tim Walz, we may be looking at a real-life Manchurian candidate? That may be up to the Congressional Committee to determine. But imagine the possibility that come 2025, marching orders for our American government may not even originate in Washington, D.C. Whether the source of such a power grab in our nation's capital proves to be foreign or domestic, it may signal an end to our democratic republic.
Once they're in, if Democrats have a clean sweep, meaning they get the White House, they keep the Senate, they take back the House of Representatives, Kamala Harris has made known her agenda to nuke the filibuster in the Senate. And with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin out of the picture, it'll be easier for them to do that if they've got the majority. Once that happens, they will pack the Supreme Court. They will pass voter registration and voter reform bills that will take a lot of the discretion to draw legislative districts away from state legislatures. They'll add D.C. and Puerto Rico as states and make a couple of other changes, including to our campaign finance laws, that together will make an indefinite, perpetual Democratic majority in the United States Congress our new reality.
And that is why voting for a solid downline of patriotic candidates running for the U.S. Congress, governors, and state legislatures is equally important to secure our American future. If all goes according to plan, the sun will rise over America on Wednesday morning, November 6, 2024, just as it always does. We can expect that sunrise to appear the same, but what of America? Will it be the same? The decision we make for the direction of our country on Election Day, Tuesday, November 5th, will affect our lives and direct the futures of untold generations. We've already examined the very real and different outcomes we may expect as a nation, depending upon how Americans vote that day. Will we become pawns to autocratic tyranny, little more than nameless cogs in the merciless machinery of globalist elites? The World Economic Forum has promised us we will own nothing and be happy. 2 questions. If we own nothing, who will own everything? And what will they do to us if we're not happy about that? And what if Kamala Harris does win? Will our dreams of a renewed, empowered America morph into the prophetic nightmare of Revelation with tyrannical globalist rule, digital cash, and the mark of the beast? What of our culture, traditions, language, and cherished freedoms and beliefs? Will they too fall prey to Big Brother's right think, right speak, and right actions? Has the world of George Orwell's 1984 finally arrived on our doorsteps? Or will America regain its place of leadership among the nations, preeminent in innovation, education, high-tech, science, agriculture, and business? Will checking the box on your ballot help rebuild our national security, remove terrorists and gang members, and restore the rule of law to our borders? Will the most important college in America this fall become the Electoral College? Let's look ahead to 2025. Next summer, will we be enjoying summertime family cookouts or eating bugs? Will Americans drive affordable transportation, or will we rely on mass transit, bicycles, mopeds, and tennis shoes? Will we once again be able to purchase our own homes? Or will we be competing for overpriced apartments in crime-ridden neighborhoods? During the time we have shared together, we have heard the positions of both candidates, Donald J. Trump and Kamala Harris, straight from their own mouths. We have seen how they perform under fire and compared the steadiness or shakiness of their long or short-held positions. We've considered input from media commentators, pundits, and pollsters, and weighed their collective contributions in the balances. But in the end, our decision on Tuesday, November 5th will make the difference. That choice is not merely between a Democrat or Republican candidate. It will determine critical factors like war and peace, poverty and wealth, tyranny and freedom. And it may provide each of us with the extra time we need to complete our purposes here, provide firm foundations to our families, and pass the torch of liberty along to the next generation of Americans. Christian pollster George Barna recently told radio host Glenn Beck that only half of those who identify as religious intend to vote this year, but that 17% more would go to the polls if encouraged to do so by their pastors. It's more important than ever that we encourage those in positions of legal, moral, or spiritual authority to speak out for justice, righteousness, and a return to our Creator and His ways. The United States Declaration of Independence guarantees us rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But to pursue happiness, we must be alive and free. That requires that we make a strong stand for life and liberty by standing in line to vote on Tuesday, November 5th. Now all that matters is that you and I make the right choice. But that choice is up to us.
Choices that could change our very fate. Hopes and fears, they clash and they debate. Sovereign shadows move.